Thank you for being here. We're doing another lunch session. This is Michael G came up with this idea of doing a roundtable, which is great. This is the first one that we've ever done, so we're going to be working out the kinks a little bit. Um, but today we're talking about styling, and particularly, I think this is going to be styling in React apps leaning, but styling in general, styling web apps and whatnot. And yeah, I think Michael G, if you'd like to take it away and give us kind of the overall idea of what we're going to be talking about today, let's do it.
All right, perfect. And so, so I am currently sharing my screen because, as I mentioned to Chan, I would probably myself forget these questions. And, I'm doing this also improv. So basically, it's just the three questions of, how do you style in React? And I also did throw component libraries in there because something I've noticed is sometimes the way I implement styles in React is solely determined on the component library I choose for the project. Um, so that's why I do mostly want to focus on the styling, but example that I'll get into here in a minute, you'll see why I kind of threw component libraries in there as well. And basically how it will work. So I'm at the top here, and we can just go one by one. While we want to encourage everyone, strongly recommend that you participate. You don't have to. So if it gets to you and you just want to listen, you just want to lurk, you can say skip or pass, and we can just move down to the next person. And you can see on Discord, it's nice and alphabetical. So we can just go in the order that it shows in the live event voice channel.
Also,
So
if you know that you don't want to participate in any of these, just kind of I'm going to put a message that just says like don't want to participate. You can just put an emote on that, and I'll try to make sure that we don't ask you at all.
Okay, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. So cool. So with that being said, like I mentioned, I'll go first so I can kind of give everybody an example and kick things off here. So the first question, what do you currently use for work? And this is interesting because what I am using for work currently is what I talked to Makar about, before I got my recent new job, is using SAS. So this is the first time I've used a preprocessor in a work environment. And I've always had my eye on it, and I've always wanted to use it. But I can also, maybe I can like pull these pages up on the fly. But using SAS, so using the preprocessor, it's immediate benefits, and probably the main ones I've gotten so far is importing of the CSS files into another one, nesting, and I'm sure don't have to go into a technical deep dive. But so it's interesting. This is the first project as well that I haven't just grabbed a component library. I'm actually styling everything with just CSS and building things out myself. So that will probably bleed into building out our own internal design system, which is a whole other mountain. But it's super interesting, and I love developing in CSS to begin with. So I'm excited to move forward with that. So answer the first question is just building out using SAS and CSS pretty much, importing it directly into components and using it that way. And so question number two is, what would you use if you started a brand new project today? And there's been a insane amount of hype around Tailwind. And I think I'm honestly to the point where I think if I was to start a brand new project today, I think I would give into the hype. I would give it a try. I'm really back and forth with this because I love how you can just grab things and use it, and just like super fast, super quick. But like mentioned previously, I love writing CSS. So I kind of battle between, just using, these class names and having everything provided. And I feel like I would be in the documentation like all day trying to figure out, okay, I need this class. Like, where do I find, I need PT dash, oh, okay, PT dash, oh, but I need Y dash 4. And so if I had to start a new one today, I would try this out. And maybe a side project coming up, I will fully dive into this and maybe have additional feedback on Tailwind. And then the third and most interesting question to me is, because I get way too drilled down into the stuff I use. So if I took away what I wanted to use first, then what would I use? And the third thing I would use is Emotion and CSS and JS. But the only reason why I would use that is because I would probably pull in Chakra UI. And that is I know they use Emotion and Framer Motion in here. But basically why I would use Chakra is because it a ton of things out of the box. And it's really great for like quick dark mode implementation. And I don't want to take too long on my turn, so we can maybe at the end we can kind of dive a little bit more into the technical aspects of this choice. But that would probably, if I had a backup option, something probably more reliable that I've worked with before, this would be my option for sure. So that's how I style things. And if I didn't have my first option, then what would I try? And so hopefully that didn't take too long. And unless Ben has mentioned he does not want to go, I will pass it off to Ben.
All right. So at work, we have a component library. This is put together by a centrally managed team based on input from our design organization. So we use that for a lot of our common controls. Insofar as the rest of our page styles go, it's hard and fast CSS at this point. We're not using any frameworks. We're not using any preprocessors. It's CSS style sheets brought into the application using Webpack. What I'm using in my personal projects is also hard and fast CSS because I'm writing usually 11D for my personal projects. And I have toyed around with using Sass for personal projects, but I haven't done it in any sort of like professional setting. So that's what I'm using now. The main reason I'm using Sass is because I like having access to nesting. That helps me think of how I'm writing the styles that I'm writing. But beyond that, I'm not really using anything to ensure a particular design more than anything. I'm not using anything for appearance, getting fancy styles out of the box. I usually tend to roll my own there. And so that kind of influences what I would use if I were starting a new project, or what my second choices are, because basically I'm going to default to just hard CSS style sheets more than anything.
And I'll throw in one very quick question before. Do you use CSS modules or just CSS, and you just are careful about putting things in the global scope?
I haven't used CSS modules. That's something I want to play around with more. I think that's going to be a huge power up. I tend to be of the opinion that form follows function. And so when you look at my styles, you would see a whole lot of like my selectors tend to be much more oriented around semantic elements and leveraging like child and neighbor selectors. And that tends to get me most of the way there in terms of the scoping that I need. Of course, in an enterprise application, like you'll find a lot more classes. I've worked a lot more with classes in that regard. But for my own personal projects, I generally find it just much easier to lean on the semantics of it all. And so I haven't needed yet, really, in my own side projects, anything like modules to scope out those styles.
All right, cool. Thank you, Ben. And so next on the list, the one and only Chantastic.
Oh, I forgot this is alphabetical. I was like, oh yeah, I'll like chime in at the end. Yeah, so what do I currently use for work? So the thing that I'm working on right now is really similar to something that I'm trying to like develop as like an open source project. But I've worked right now. What I'm working on exclusively is this kind of, as Ben was saying, building up atomic elements in CSS. So like, avatar, heading, text, like all those kind of things, using custom properties. And part of, like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to talk about in the abstract, but basically like just that, building up like these tiny little elements that can be like customized kind of from the outside in, and then having a separate part of that which is like the actual grids that like lay everything out. So I would have like a grid for I don't know, like a speech bubble, or like a grid for, some type of like checkout process or whatever, but then having those kind of tell the small elements like what their sizes should be. So I don't have any like XS, small, medium, large, any of those kind of like modifier classes. It's really just this handoff between elements and grids. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. That's what I'm like building up at work. I really like it. I feel like it's kind of a unique approach that I think is I think we'll see more of as grids get more popular. And then yeah, what would I do if I would start using a project today? I would probably continue to build out on that. I'll use this though as an opportunity to talk that I have, for like I think 5 years now, been using like a utility style of work, or utility style of like CSS classes. I have this like kind of library that I built out for our products called Minions CSS, and it is very close in mindset to Tailwind, but without all of the awesome tooling that Tailwind has provided around that. I think that the downside of that is that every piece of UI can be like individually like tailored, right? Like it sits at a really nice like place, but then there's not like these kind of broad concepts of like this grid looks this way and it's like repeatable, unless you like introduce a library like React or whatever to like wrap that. And I don't love the way that like you have kind of like these strict like concepts of light mode and dark mode, as opposed to having everything just be able to be like rethemed very easily, kind of like from the outside in. So that's something that I would like caution against in that technique, if you're thinking about having more than just light and dark, but like having themes, or having a light high contrast, a light low contrast. If you need more than two, those utility libraries aren't always going to be your best friend, from my experience. If you couldn't use your first choice, what would be your second? I think that probably Tailwind would be my second choice right now, just because there's so much great tooling around it. And because so much of our stuff is in the world of React, it totally makes sense to just wrap it up in React. And then they're so motivated to continue to develop it that I think they'll be able to easily address those concerns in like a V3 or whatever. Like they have so many people working on it. It's just a really good product. So I don't think any concern would be a huge concern for too long. So yeah, those are my three. Hopefully that helps.
Cool. And yeah, for Tailwind, I remember before UI came out, when it was just Tailwind CSS, I was like, "Ooh, this could be a perfect opportunity." It's like, oh, it's for the React world, just abstract a bunch of those classes and components, and then boom, component library. I'm like, this is how I'm going to get into open source. And then Tailwind UI came out, and that dream was squashed the second that it was thought up of. So that's cool. So let me take one more look at the text channel. And I see we have Dan, who's next.
So I'm a little bit all over the place. So lots of CMS and PHP stuff I still have to deal with, and all of that is basically Sass and flat CSS. For a new project we just kicked off, we're doing decoupled with Next.js on the front end and actually leaning pretty heavily into styled components for that one. So I'm still very new to it, learning the library, but really enjoying it so far. And I think if I was starting another project, I would also use that again. So just lots of dynamic elements, lots of variations between, screen sizes, and just having that CSS in JS dynamic element. I'm just really enjoying. And if I could not use that, would probably reach for Emotion or just a similar CSS and JS library.
Cool. Would you use, just curiosity, have you looked into Chakra or anything like that use it like a library that utilizes CSS and JS, or just CSS like, pulling in style components or something like that?
I have not looked into using any kind of pre-built library like that so far, just kind of doing everything from an existing design, from scratch, just using styled components.
Thank you, Dan. And let me see, I think I saw Ferret wanted to maybe go towards the end. Okay, so Makar would be next.
Okay. Hi, everyone again. May I share my screen real quick? So while we were talking, I created a tiny React app to show why exactly I prefer what I do. So usually I use SAS with models. So it's like built in for CRA applications. If you just name your applications like model.css and import them, everything becomes modular. So it means all the classes are hashed. So there's no way you mess up anything. So but this creates this problem that usually you are adding like extra active or I don't know, focused or that kind of styles for your elements. Like for example, this element, like when it's active, it's getting an extra style. So that task is a little bit getting complicated, but it's solved by using the class names library and using this kind of setting of an extra class. And this is for the styling itself. And just like Ben, I love CSS because of the what do you call this? CSS inside CSS.
Nesting?
Nesting, yes, as you just mentioned. And for libraries, I've been using Material UI lately. I really like it. And if I start a new project, I'll definitely use modeling plus Material UI.
Nice.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Cool. And yeah, for SAS, I mean, Makar, we had a brief discussion about, I've looked into it before, but I haven't used it in a, production environment. But, the nesting that he kind of showed with like the and hover, but I think the biggest thing for me is those media queries that you can nest within the selector. That was like a complete game changer. So, I mentioned it when I went, but +1 for CSS or SAS CSS. That was awesome. And so I see in the chat, we can jump back up to Ferret, who so he's ready to answer the question. So if you would like to take it away.
Yeah, I can try. If you all hear me, am I audible? Because I'm in a completely different time zone.
Loud and clear.
Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, I have new AirPods, which seems to be really working well. Okay, I will just jumpstart. Well, I mean, at work, I am currently jumping between two apps. One we did from scratch, and there we used styled components and built everything from the designs we have. Like at work, we generally have designers who do create some designs, and then we're just trying basically like from their ideation to let's make this into the application. And there for the last 6 months, I'm using styled components. And so far, I pretty much like it. And at the same time, I have a second project, which is kind of legacy now. And there we use Sass with CSS modules, where we introduce CSS modules also lately, I think also like last year. Well, from that perspective, I have like both worlds. I like CSS and JS somehow because it has some really great things, like the whole idea of having just the styles inside your components, and then mentally I'm done, versus Sass giving me some more nesting power tools, but at the same time, I have to say, destroyed things with Sass before. So CSS modules really helped on that perspective. And well, the second question, what would you use if you started a brand new project today? To be honest, I'm not sure yet. I tend to say if it's something I don't want to think about too much about design, then I might say I start with something like Chakra UI. So not even Tailwind, immediately Chakra, because I'm too much into React for side projects. Or like when I have friends asking me, hey, could you just quickly do me some websites? And I'm like, okay, let's do it quickly, but still make it nice. Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the past I used Material UI, but I think the community moved on to different libraries. And if the first choice didn't work out, what would be your second? Well, the second I think would be for me really going from zero with styled components. Like on that perspective, like if I have a bit more time, then I do love to say, okay, I create my own design basically, or ideate with people who are better in design than me, and then we just together create our own style library. That's it.
Awesome. And yeah, that is, that's a question I'll maybe save for the end. If anybody has experience building up their own design library. I think Ben briefly mentioned it, but like I said, I'll say that towards the end of like completely building up your own design, like how it seems daunting at first, but is it really? But like I said, we can save that towards the end. And so we can go to Roman.
I can go. Yeah. So let's see. What do we currently use at work? Well, I work for a consulting agency, so we technically use a lot of things. My team specifically uses Bootstrap that I'm on now. I actually think it's React Strap, not Bootstrap itself. And then also we have a number of like internal projects that we work on, and those all use Material UI for the most part. That's usually where we lean towards. What would you use if you started a brand new project today? I would definitely be in the Tailwind boat as well there. I think I started using it for the first time about a year ago, and absolutely fell in love with the way that it was set up, and especially the speed at which you can create good-looking UI, especially for just those one-off side projects. So, my second choice would probably be. This is a tough one because I've used Sass in the past, and I've enjoyed working with Sass as well. I'd probably have to say Sass. That's it for me.
And I do have one quick question,
Sure.
which will be a super fast, just a percentage. Using Tailwind, you get all these. It's basically like Bootstrap. It gives you all these class names. It's just boom, 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 and you just plug it in. Everything just works. If you had to give just a guesstimate percentage of like how much actual CSS you're writing that's custom, what percentage would you say that would be?
For Bootstrap?
For a Tailwind project.
Oh, for a Tailwind project?
Yeah. I think it'd be pretty applicable to. I think Bootstrap would be a pretty similar question as well, though.
Okay. Yeah. So I think from what I can remember on the few projects that I've done with Tailwind, man, I would only say like 20-30% of like changing the config file to use specific styles, and it was mostly just colors. There's a few occasions where I had to use like width and a few odds and ends, but aside from that.
All right, thank you.
Susie.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. So I'm pretty new to React, well, like a year, and I haven't explored all my options. Right now I have experience with Material UI, which I really, really like because the components are nice out the box. It's really nice for something like internal tooling where your package size may not really matter. Let's see, I also am kind of new to styled components, but I'm all about it. I really like how easy it is to refer back. You just put an element name and it's done. You can easily refer back to where or how you styled your component. Let's see, what I would definitely use now is probably something for Material UI. Our stack is a little weird because our internal tooling is going to be split where it's developer's choice basically, or we have all the same back end, and then the front end, like I can use React, my teammates can use Angular. So I would probably need to choose something that works pretty well or with both. React and Angular. For myself, on my personal projects, I would probably, until I learned something new, probably use styled components, and I like CSS modules as well. But yeah, my talk is going to be brief because just for lack of experience, I'm really excited to learn about all these libraries and styling methodologies when I have the time. So thank you.
Awesome. And yeah, that's why, if we take component libraries, and if we focus more on the styling part and take out component libraries in general, that's the best thing about developing CSS and developing in Sass, CSS modules, because CSS in itself is going to follow you wherever framework or library you choose. And so that's like the safe bet of I know Chakra I think is expanding to Vue, but say in the off chance your company completely migrates to Angular, which I actually have direct experience with that. So, you're going to just be like, okay, I got to, kind of start from scratch here. So that's why I always advocate for, if writing as much CSS or Sass as possible. And so going back to the list, so we're towards the end. Rob, I know you said maybe you wanted to wait till the end. Did you want to kind of jump in or just still kind of fly on the wall?
Yeah, I can jump in. Sorry, I was waiting for the coffee to hit. So currently at work, I am on a C# desktop app. So I'm using the beautiful WinForms for all of my styling, which is a good time. But as far as, I used to work for an agency and we built our libraries out custom. And I don't know, have you guys seen, there's an article from Thoughtbot that helped immensely in that process. Is anyone familiar with that? Or they kind of had some basic rules to follow that, I started out with React Native was my first foray into React, and just turfed 2 apps. I mean, they're out there, they're on the App Store, people are using them, but the styling was a massive mess. And finally, like following, they just had basic rules of just sort of, keeping all of your styles easy to find where they're under the source, keeping everything atomic. So, if you want a small rounded button, having a small class and a round, and then spreading them in and having a small rounded button as far as your styles. And then making them easy to use, so they're all bundled in, into an index, so you can import them, and then it's just a matter of, colors.green or spacing.wide or whatever. And that helped us out a lot in building our library. And then I like having the styles close to the components. I think the the I don't know, just mentally it's easier to, when you're trying to get something right, just to look down in the file rather than to go find it somewhere else. I dig that. I don't know. I guess if I were to use something else, if that wasn't available, it really finally worked well. I mean, just after destroying two projects worth of styles, the third time was the charm. But if I were to use something else, I think on all of our forms that we used across our apps, I used style components, and that was just kind of because the Formic guides were using style components, but it worked really, really well for that use case. So I'd probably go there. That's all.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And I see we have, last but not least, sneaking in here late, the one and only Shark of the Discord. If the Shark would like to participate or skip out, last but not, I knew you were going to try and sneak in late to be last but not least. But
nope. I just saw the event going on, figured I'd pop in. So don't mind me, just creeping per usual.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So that kind of, I think we got through everybody, but if you didn't go, you could just kind of, just annoy me with a ping or something in the chat, or just yell at me. I did have one question to kind of kick off a additional discussion, and anybody can really jump in on this. But from what I remember, I think it was Ben and Rob who mentioned that they chose to build their own, component libraries, or they're in the process of building their own, or for work building their own component library. So if you know the knowledge of why that technical decision was made, the question would be, what was the decision behind building it custom in terms of like using something that exists? What was the idea behind that? And how much work, you can put it in super general terms, like how much, because it seems super daunting, but is it as daunting as it seems to, start from scratch and build your own component library?
Yeah, I can start with that. So first of all, I'm not on the effort that's building our internal component library. We have teams that are devoted to doing that. But a lot of it comes down to just basically having like our own branded experience for external facing stuff. I've actually been really surprised to hear a lot of people talking about using things like Bootstrap and Tailwind, because like, I would be curious what kinds of applications you're using those for. Like, because I work on an external facing enterprise web app, right? And so therefore it's going to have all the enterprise branding associated with that. And the easiest way to, like, for the company to do that, I guess, is what they've determined is like, hey, we'll pre-package components with these styles and with the interactions that we know fit branding. We'll package those up for you instead of using some third-party system like Bootstrap or Tailwind or anything like that. So that, I think, is the big thing, right? Is we have our own component library because we have our own branding.
Yeah, I think ours was the same. Our CEO was kind of his take. I love him, but it was kind of like, oh, we're not going to use QuickBooks. We should build QuickBooks, or we're not going to have a CRM. Well, so the same thing with a styling library. We ended up building it from scratch. But I think the main thing that kept it from being daunting, the first two times it turned into spaghetti jubilee. I don't know something, but that it is just taking some time to think about the architecture and maybe thinking of it as architecture, and following just standards and a certain way of doing things. And I linked that article in the comments. If it makes it not so hard if you're just spreading in your common things and then doing component specific stuff close to where it matters.
One thing I'd like to add, kind of like about the virtue of Tailwind, maybe, is not specifically to Tailwind, but kind of why I think it is better, or a virtue that it has over some of the React specific tooling right now is something that I encounter a lot, in that we have applications that are like 12 years old, and large swaths of them exist exclusively in Rails, right? So if we choose something that's React specific, well, then that demands either two things. Like, one, that only ever target like the new features, and then we have to rebuild that stuff again anyway. Or two, like we have to rewrite, like 10 years worth of app. And that's just not going to happen. Like, like no company operates like that. So I think like one of the reasons that Tailwind is such a big front runner and is seeing such great success right now is because it is clearly able to be used in a migratory sense, right? Like, you can migrate code as easy as writing new code, and it allows you to like think of your entire application regardless of the technology that's being used to render it, with like a single set of tooling. And now that's not a Tailwind specific thing, but I do think that it represents a return to like CSS being like the styling primitive, because as people want to like change the technology, like maybe they go from like React to Vue, or some like brand new hotness thing comes out, and it's like it depending exclusively on a technology to handle more parts of it is nice. Everything's co-located, but then also you have the challenge then of like, what does a migration look like if we want to start using the next latest and greatest, and React becomes our legacy system. And I think that's just something that comes with like the experience of having to like have lived in like a long-standing product before, and like make everything look and feel the same. So yeah, I think that's something. I think that's one of the reasons that Tailwind is kind of like standing bright right now, is people are like, oh, I can use this everywhere, and it's the same no matter what, and that's great.
Yeah, that's kind of the approach that I took for, especially kind of going towards, Tailwind. The approach that I have, instead of building, we want to have a custom design system to where we're not just, plugging in. Because, there for a little bit, when Material UI was the go-to, you would look at all these sites, they'd look exactly the same. It's just material everywhere, Bootstrap sites look like kind of copy-pasted. So that's why I try to meet in the middle of building something custom, but not completely starting from scratch. So it's like, okay, bring me in, Tailwind I feel like is a good median, where I'm like, okay, it can get me there, but I can build custom, like my version of whatever I want to build with it. So it gives me the tools to move faster to, build something that's custom. And so that's why I was like, oh, this is great. They don't have anything React yet. I'm going to be a, open source celebrity. Tailwind UI for React component library. And then, like I mentioned, Tailwind UI, you shut that down completely. I was like, okay, I'll move on. But yeah, that's I completely agree. I try to bring in something that exists that will get me, just doesn't feel like I'm just starting from absolute scratch, and get me up and going to where, I can build something custom. It won't look like every other site that uses Tailwind.
Ferret again. No, I wanted to maybe also underline this, that my experience is also going towards what Chan said. Like, I have to admit, I was part of 3 design system migrations, where I was also the person who sometimes did the wrong decisions. So we started with web components in 2018. This never worked out. Then we moved to something else. And then I remember before I left my old department where I worked, we started doing something with Material UI. I mean, you can also customize Material UI heavily, but the pain we had back then, because you also have to customize, and then they are changing the library heavily, and then you have to customize your customization again for these new changes. It was, at one point, it was a mess. Even if I think we had like Flow.js and TypeScript later put into that, like it was a huge effort to maintain it. And I see Tailwind being so much easier to maintain comparing to Material UI, because it was really hard at one point. Whereas when I check Tailwind, I'm like, yeah, this is super easy. Like, once you're into this, you can it's just classes. Like you don't really care about the framework, which would be like with Chakra UI, Material UI. If you are too much into it, which many companies were, then you will have problems. But yeah, I see the benefit of Tailwind, but I'm still also like, I can do it on my own with CSS. I don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I was gonna play devil's advocate a little bit, because the very first impression of Tailwind CSS that I got was like kind of diving into the code of some of the examples, and I was just like, oh man, I'm like, did anybody else get the impression? Because if you just append so many classes, it just at one point or another, it gets to a point where it's almost unreadable. It looks like algebra to me a little bit. So I was wondering, playing devil's advocate as somebody, like, the cons, the solution to that, if you're in React, you can just abstract that away in a React component. But if you're using the CSS, you want to go from library to library. If you're using CSS, you have an algebra equation. You're looking at px-y carry the one. And it's just like, does anybody, the cons towards Tailwind, so we can kind of get a mix. So anybody kind of get that impression as well?
I've gone on record a couple times as saying that like Tailwind is a framework that requires another framework, a UI construction framework. So if you don't have a concept of components in the library that you're using to construct UI, Tailwind is not fun. Because you do need to have that abstraction layer, whether it be a component, whether it be like a partial in Rails, whether it be like whatever it be, like you want to use the avatar or like the button and like not think about the fact that it's being constructed of like 50 different class names and whatnot. So I think I definitely resonate with that, and I think that it is something that requires a UI construction tool to be useful.
I'll just add, for that very reason, I don't use Bootstrap. I never used Bootstrap. Same problem there.
Recently, I read a blog about like Netlify. They are adopting Tailwind CSS. Like they have listed a couple of reasons why they are using Tailwind CSS. In that, like one point is readability. They want it to be readable. So instead of writing like some like 10 CSS classes, they are composing like one new syntax like which they adopted. I'll post a screenshot about that. Like I shared the link also. They have some CTL abstraction which they can write for all the classes and like create a component like object kind of a thing. So it gives more readability if we have 10 classes to write for a single day or something.
This seems nice because like you're even further abstracting that into like you could extract those into like variables for those components, right? Like these are the core ones. These are the additional ones for like any additional props that get passed in, etc. And separating those out makes it even nicer than like that gigantic string.
Yes, and yeah, that's why I meant Tailwind. Just the readability, first impression I got, the readability of it and abstracting away, making it more readable, doing something like that is, I think, like you mentioned, is pretty much required if, unless you want a ton of pain. But I know, so we're getting towards the top of the hour. And I do, maybe I'll throw in, if we want to bleed over a little bit, I'll throw in one more topic that anybody can just jump in. So I was wondering, so in other libraries and stuff like that, I really want to ask the question of what do you guys think of having styles in the same file as your, you have your template script, styles all in the same file. And, I know a lot of people advocate that, and I know a lot of people don't. So I know React, unless you're using, JSS, CSS and JS, it's always external styles coming from, external style sheet. So I did want to throw out, what are your guys' opinions for everything being in one file versus files? And I'll go last. I'll just throw the question out.
I'm for files. I'm for shorter chunks of CSS. I worked on big chunks back when I was doing WordPress websites. and that pushed me towards SCSS and also towards dividing files. But then you also have some common files, like you have component-specific files, but you have at least one common style sheet for things that you reuse in more than one place, usually.
And I guess I'm trying to, I'm debating with I always debate with myself. I'm like, if single file, if you had your template script and everything in the same file in React, it provides the dream that you can just like select that CSS class, Control F, and then you can just, you're jumping up and down the file and you're like moving boom, 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 Command F, Command F, Command F, and you're just jumping all over the place. You're getting things fast instead of, having to go here and then there. But then, you have one big Angular JS looking file. It could be, it's going to go down to oblivion. So that's why I see it both ways. I think if I had a choice, I'd say probably files, keep it separate, because I like kind of separating, separation of concerns anyway. But yeah, I was just curious if anybody was like, oh man, I really wish that, we can just throw in a style tag in a React component and have it in the same file without doing it in JS.
If I may jump in again, like even scrolling a long file takes a lot of energy. Like you can search in your IDE search and find whatever you're trying to find in all the files anyways. But when you are working in a single file and when you're like looking at one chunk while working on the other and scrolling up and down, it's surprisingly time consuming.
Yeah, I come from from Rails, where we just had styles.css somewhere in the asset pipeline, and it was thousands and thousands of lines. Trying to find it was a massive pain. So I think both is the answer, right? Like I think like if you can put things into a module and import from there, then your common styles, like we want a header to header this way, you can just spread, you can import from your index, and that way you're always importing the same file. And then you spread it into your local and you don't have to worry about duplicating the code very much. Or just be something, just spread typography.header or whatever it is out of there. And then I don't know. I think it was a big game to just not just to be able to, like you're saying, look down and see my styles and change things and not have to worry about them being overridden by other things. And I don't know. I think there's a lot to be gained, and you can take parts that are common and put them in a central place, but keep the things that are individually are particular to an individual component. Keep them right.
Yeah, I picked up most of what you said, but you got robot voice a little bit. I think it like, but yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying. Like I said, I got most of it, but then not all of it. But I know. So anyway, we are at the top of the hour, and I don't want to bleed this too far over the scheduled hour. Did anyone? I did have to provide just one or two more final thoughts. I did recently build. So any of those who are interested in Chakra, Tailwind and Chakra are definitely my favorites. This would be my first choice. This would be my second. I did build a project I had a really good experience with Chakra, but the one thing I know, I wish I had the page up, but I think Chakra is mentioned that it does have a limitation. It's for like if the project scales to like. And I gotta find the page, and maybe I'll link to it after, and I'll find it. But it says basically, if it scales to a certain point, you can maybe start seeing, performance issues with, how they're doing CSS and JS, and might not be as performant as just a CSS solution. But I've used this for my new personal site, which is kind of not fully polished yet, but I had a really good experience using Chakra initially, and it was just like boom, 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 boom. And I expect the same thing will be with Tailwind. But yeah, if anybody had anything else, any closing comments, concerns, questions, anything else, you can take the floor. But if not, I think we can wrap up.
Great job hosting this, Michael.
Thank you. Definitely. Beta version, alpha version, not 1.0 yet, but I'm glad that I didn't completely mess it up. And so yeah, I was actually surprised. We had a good turnout, so we got through everybody, and yeah, hopefully next time, just get a little bit more into the discussion part at the end. But yeah, this was good improv, so figure it out. And then if anybody had any questions, we can just kind of continue this conversation in either the event channel or just CSS channel in the dev section. But yeah, it's been awesome. Everybody joining, I really appreciate it, and I already have like 2 or 3 ideas of something that we can do for the next roundtable. So maybe I'll put something on the calendar here soon.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Michael G, for organizing this. We really appreciate it. This was a great discussion. I was really glad to see everybody's like perspectives and thoughts and experiences. Most importantly, the experiences. It was pretty cool to see like what people are doing and the reasons they're doing it. So anyway, if you're checking in, watching this later, subscribe if you like this. Join us in Discord, events.lunch.dev/Discord. Discord. That's for people who do housekeeping to maybe communicate with each other. Who knows? Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. See you all around in the server.